Most people think building wealth starts with compounding interest, but here's the uncomfortable truth. It doesn't. It starts with exhaustion, with years of savings when the needle barely moves. And before we even get to $100,000, there are quiet thresholds, like around $30,000 and $50,000, where the first signs of real momentum begin to show. Why is the first $100,000 the hardest number you'll ever fight for in finance? Because it's not only about math, it's about mindset. What if the hard part is actually doing the job of shaping you, preparing you to handle more later? In the next few minutes, I'll show you how this stage of the journey isn't failure, but an initiation designed to transform you. Share in the comments where you're currently at, $500, $500,000, or $50,000, and let's put your progress in perspective. So if the first step is this demanding, why does that $100,000 feel like a wall standing between you and freedom? From the outside, the $100,000 milestone can look like a straightforward objective. But once you step onto the path, it becomes clear why so many describe it as distant and almost unreachable. This is the moment in your financial journey often called the call to adventure. It's the point where you're no longer just drifting, you've decided to change your life. Maybe you land your first proper job, or you finally get tired of debt closing in on you, or perhaps you hear about someone retiring in their 30s and think, why can't that be me? The first spark creates energy, but like in every story, a spark alone isn't enough to keep the fire burning. Here's where reality rushes in. You crunch the numbers and quickly discover how punishing the math feels early on. Let's say you've committed to saving $500 per month. That's $6,000 in a year. Simple arithmetic tells you that even without spending a cent, it would take more than 16 years just to stack up $100,000. 16 years of saying no to extras while everyone around you seems to enjoy life. The math is sound, but the time horizon feels like a punch in the gut. This is often the first moment people realize the scale of what they've taken on. The frustration deepens when those disciplined daily sacrifices don't seem to move the needle. Maybe you skip nights out, keep a modest apartment, and stick to home-cooked meals. After months of that effort, your account balance might show just a few $1,000s, enough to cover a couple months of rent or buy a new laptop, but nowhere near the goal you're chasing. What feels like major lifestyle trade-offs barely registers in the numbers, and that mismatch creates doubt. You start asking whether the sacrifice is actually worth it when the reward seems so far off. Even when small wins appear, they can feel underwhelming. Imagine seeing your investment generate $1,000 in returns for the first time. On paper, that sounds like progress. But in reality, it's roughly the cost of new tires or a few trips to the gas station. Compared to years of consistent saving, the gain feels fragile, like it could disappear at any moment. Emergencies add to this burden. A surprise medical bill or a major car repair can wipe out months of slow savings in days. That recurring knockback keeps many people stuck in a cycle of feeling like their hard work only resets the clock. This is where psychology often outweighs math. Behavioral economists explain that our brains measure progress relative to the effort we put in. If you're grinding day after day without seeing anything big stack up, the fight feels unwinnable. You've probably seen it happen. Friends save hard for a year, then quit altogether when the results disappoint them. The obstacle isn't that the goal is unreachable, it's that the distance makes people lose faith they'll ever arrive. But this stage isn't wasted time, far from it. What feels like failure is actually the opening test of the journey. Every dollar you save and every sacrifice you choose builds endurance, resilience, and a new sense of identity. The first $10,000, the first $20,000, those aren't just numbers. They're training milestones shaping you into someone who can handle much larger financial responsibilities ahead. And when I reference return rates in these examples, say 7% as a long-term market average, or 10% in round number scenarios, these are only illustrative. Real outcomes will always vary, but the point is to show the curve of growth and why it feels flat in the beginning. In this light, the opening grind is more than just delayed gratification. It's preparation, setting the stage for how you'll respond to challenges years later. And while the first steps may feel invisible, the truth is they're laying a foundation you can't see yet. Which raises the next question. What happens when you've been saving consistently, but every choice still feels like it hardly moves the dial? This stage of the journey is often called the trial in the wilderness because progress feels almost invisible. You're showing up every month, doing what you're supposed to, saving, investing, cutting back, but the payoff doesn't match the effort. The numbers creep upward so slowly it feels like the work isn't even registering. That gap between discipline and visible results is what makes this season so hard to survive. In the beginning, every dollar saved feels like proof that you're moving forward. But once the habit sets in, the emotions fade. The routine becomes automatic, and instead of excitement, you feel drained. A $500 contribution is technically progress, but stacked against a six-figure target, it feels microscopic, almost irrelevant. That disconnect between effort and outcome makes it easy to question why you're putting yourself through it. Setbacks magnify that frustration. One unexpected car repair can erase 3 months of steady savings. A single doctor's bill can wipe out your entire buffer overnight. These aren't rare events, they're part of life. And when they strike, it feels like being shoved back to the starting line. There's a practical takeaway here. To stop emergencies from resetting your progress, you need a small cash buffer alongside automation. Set your savings to run without thought, and then separate out a modest emergency fund so the next crisis doesn't undo months of work. On top of this, the returns during these years often seem laughably small. A $5,000 portfolio earning 7% for the year produces about $350. Spread across 12 months, that's less than many people spend in a single grocery run. Yes, it's technically compounding at work, but it doesn't feel powerful yet. Most people expect obvious momentum much sooner, and when it isn't there, discouragement grows. That discouragement opens the door to deeper traps. Researchers highlight 3 patterns that can sabotage progress at this exact stage. The first is lifestyle inflation. As soon as your income rises, your spending rises too, leaving nothing extra to compound. The fix is to guard that gap. Lock away a portion of every raise before it slides into your budget. The second trap is inconsistent habits. When saving feels optional, you'll hit pause on months when life gets tough. Automation is the cure. Set it and let your momentum survive weeks when motivation disappears. The third is emotional spending, swiping your card to escape stress or boredom. Here, the fix is to identify your triggers and build tiny barriers. Delay a purchase for 24 hours or remove saved payment details from your phone. Simple friction can stop hundreds of dollars of impulse leakage. These traps don't just drain your bank account, they drain your belief that wealth building is possible. And often, that's the real wall. Less about the math, more about fighting your own psychology. Because the middle stretch isn't about how clever your investments are, it's about whether you can stay consistent long enough for the slow math to start accelerating. This is why most people give up. Not at the start when they're still excited, but in this long middle when the grind is heavy and the reward feels shallow. But if you can hold steady through this wilderness, something important happens. The setbacks teach you resilience, and the structure you build around your money becomes part of who you are. It's slow, it's frustrating, but it sets you up for the first turning points, the quiet moments when growth actually begins to slow. And those subtle shifts mark the beginning of an entirely new phase in the journey. When do you first notice compounding actually doing work for you? It usually happens quietly, without fanfare, and the realization can feel almost startling. You check your account and see the balance has risen, not because you worked overtime or transferred extra savings, but because your money started moving on its own. For years, it felt like you were dragging every dollar forward, and now suddenly, the current begins to push back in your favor. These are the quiet turning points, and they're easy to miss if you're not paying attention. One of the first thresholds tends to appear around $30,000 invested. At that size, a 10% return adds about $3,000 in a single year. That's not freedom money yet, but it's far from pocket change. It could cover rent for a month, pay for insurance programs, or offset an unexpected car bill. And the striking part is this: you didn't have to lift a finger beyond holding that balance in place. These numbers are illustrative, meant to show scale, but the psychological impact is real. The return suddenly feels bigger than the small adjustments you make in a monthly budget. Contrast that with the early days. On $5,000 invested, even a 10% gain produces just $500 in a year. That figure barely registers against months of sacrifice. But grow the base to $50,000, and the same market performance might hand you $5,000 in a year. At that point, the growth begins to rival what you save from your paycheck. You're no longer comparing the returns to a few lunches skipped. You're comparing them to entire months of disciplined work. That's the moment you realize compounding has crossed from theory into something tangible. It's important to pause here. If you're able, take a second and glance at your own account balance. Notice where you are on this curve. Even if the numbers feel small now, identifying your position helps you see the trajectory and makes these turning points personal instead of abstract. The tricky part is that these moments barely arrive with fireworks. Most people expect breakthrough growth to look dramatic, like stepping onto a summit with the view suddenly open. Instead, it's subtle, like walking through a fog that gradually lifts. One month looks much like the last, until the year closes and you see that the money has shifted in ways it never did before. The math hasn't changed. What's changed is the weight of your foundation. A clear image for this stage is a river taking shape. At first, you were adding drops of water one at a time, wondering if they'd ever amount to anything. Now the flow has gathered enough depth that it starts moving under its own power. You created the conditions, but the current is what carries it forward. Once you see this, you stop thinking of your investments as a static container and begin recognizing them as a living system with momentum. This stage is the psychological reward for enduring years of invisible progress. It teaches you to trust the process and proves that patience wasn't wasted. The quiet returns validate the hours spent resisting lifestyle creep and the months when progress fell flat. For the first time, the system works alongside you instead of depending entirely on your input. That shift, from dragging to being lifted, changes your mindset just as much as it changes your math. And here's the real significance. These turning points are signals that momentum is starting to compound in your favor. The dollar growth remains modest compared to what's ahead, but the trajectory becomes clear. You move from asking, "Will this ever work?" to recognizing it's already working. That belief fuels persistence as your account approaches its next level. From here, the stakes rise, and with them, the role you play in your own financial story begins to transform. What really changes once your investments cross into six figures is not a sudden windfall, but a meaningful inflection point. Up to this moment, almost every dollar in your account came from your own effort, your hours of work, your careful trade-offs, your constant vigilance over emergencies that threaten to knock you back. Once you reach $100,000 invested, the dynamic begins to shift. Instead of only being a worker, you also step into the role of someone who owns capital, and that identity carries both financial and psychological weight. Let's break down why. If you have $100,000 invested and the market delivers a 10% return in a year, that's $10,000 in gains without you lifting a finger. Add in, say, $15,000 from your own contributions, and the account grows by $25,000 in a single year. Think back to the early days when scraping together even $5,000 felt like a mountain. The arithmetic alone shows the shift. What once took years of sheer determination now happens in a fraction of the time because of what the foundation itself is producing. That's why this threshold feels so different. Suddenly, the growth from your portfolio can rival or surpass the same raise people spend months negotiating at work. Think about how much energy goes into earning a few thousand extra dollars on the job, negotiating, pushing for promotion, or working longer hours. With 6 figures invested, the market itself can hand you that same bump in a good year. Seeing that parallel is when you realize your money is now a partner in progress, not just a byproduct of your labor. Setbacks also start to feel different at this level. In the early stage, a $1,500 car repair or medical bill could wipe out half a year of careful saving. Now, while those events still sting, they no longer undo months of compounding. Even a 10% market drop, yes, that does happen, doesn't feel like the catastrophe it once did. Instead, you start to recognize downturns for what they often become: opportunities to buy more at a lower price. To be clear, market returns always fluctuate, and you will see losses some years. The difference at 6 figures is that your portfolio has more capacity to absorb these shocks and recover with greater force once conditions improve. Along with the math comes a psychological release. In the beginning, progress depended completely on your daily discipline, saying no to purchases, tracking every expense, eating at home night after night. By the time you cross $100,000, you already carry those habits, but the pressure eases. Automation, diversification, and consistency take on more of the heavy lifting. The smarter play at this point isn't chasing faster gains or tinkering with your strategy. It's keeping things steady. Let your contributions continue to run automatically, resist the urge to constantly adjust, and trust the diversification you've already built. This single habit shift, stepping back from overmanaging, is what preserves your new advantage. It's tempting to view $100,000 as a finish line, the destination you fought so hard to reach. In reality, it functions more like proof, evidence that the patience and struggles have reshaped not just your finances, but your identity. You've become the kind of person who follows through even when the payoff is invisible, who learns persistence under pressure, and who trusts a system instead of chasing quick fixes. That identity makes the next stage not only faster in numbers, but lighter in mindset. And that's the deeper shift. The balance in your account serves as proof of endurance, but the real transformation happens in how you see yourself and behave moving forward. That's why the journey to $100,000 isn't only about money, it's about forging resilience and discipline that future compounding will amplify. And once you recognize that, you begin to see that the most powerful outcome of all is not the number itself, but who you've become on the journey to it. Reaching your first $100,000 is often misunderstood as just hitting a number, but what really matters is how you got there and what it built in you. The habits, the systems, and the mindset you formed are what set the pace for everything that comes after. Those traits don't fade at the milestone. If anything, they become stronger as the numbers grow. So here are 3 takeaways to lock in. Build habits first, because consistency beats occasional heroics. Automate your contributions and keep a small buffer to protect progress. Treat the early pain as initiation that forges your investor identity. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you? $500, $5,000, or $50,000? And what's the single thing blocking you? Drop it below. Remember, this milestone is never about luck, but the proof of your endurance and the systems you built to carry you forward.